Ever wondered what it takes to bridge the gap between business and technology? Today, we are joining by Vladimir, a seasoned entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience in fintech, wealth tech, and space tech. Having held founder and executive roles, Vladimir has mentored over 100 individuals and 30 companies and currently serves as an entrepreneur in residence at Cornell. With a unique blend of practical experience and academic insight, Radamir's approach to coaching is both insightful and results focused. Whether you are looking to mitigate startup risk or make the leap from engineer to founder, Radamir is here to share the strategies that have made him a sought after mentor and advisor. Welcome to another episode of our Founders Podcast. I'm your host, Ash, and this is a show where I interview proven founders and industry experts who share their stories, strategies, and insights to help you build, launch, and grow your business. I hope you enjoy our conversation with Vladimir. Vladimir, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ash. Thank you for having me.
Great. Do you have a favorite quote, something that inspires or motivates you that you would like to share with our audience?
Ooh, that's a good one. I do like goals. When this a little bit, I guess, becomes more methodological, where methodical, where you can accomplish them. Like in the
Mhm.
sense, I like goals that you can break up into milestones, and you know when you have actually succeeded. I know that some people and myself also at some point had a goal. I wanted to be rich. I wanted to be a founder of a startup. I wanted to sell my company. I wanted to raise the money. They're great goals, but the problem with them is that they don't have enough description or the definition, and you don't know when the time will come when you can actually say, I have accomplished that goal. So when there is a goal, I want to be rich, how much, right? Is it
Mm.
a billion? Is it a billion? Is it 100 billion? Right? It's indefinite. But the
Yeah.
more likely you decide on the number, the more likely you to reach it because you can build a path to it. But same thing, I
Mm.
want to be a founder, right? You may be a founder already. As long as you
Mhm.
give a little bit more definition to the goal, the more likely you are to execute it. So kind of going back to your question, I love a lot of goals as long as we are able to execute them and we know when they're successful.
Got it, got it. So, in theory, you're saying that the goals has to be quantifiable. You need to quantify it
So
when you're setting
that
them.
that is a good analogy, but I would also say like it's also okay to be qualitative about it. Like in a sense,
Mm.
I want to feel good about it. That's a good way, right? So then you look at the goal and do you feel about it good now? No. So sometimes we might not be able to define it. Like for example, if we're working on a relationship, right? There's no real quantifiable way you can say like, well, I would like to have zero conflicts. I would like to have 1.5 conflicts, right? It doesn't work that way. So you kind of have to
Mm.
rely on qualitative marketers too. But as long as there is a state defined where like, I would like to feel good about the relationship, for example.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, great stuff. And I was reading through your profile, Vlad, and I interestingly found some golden nuggets. So, uh, I'm eager to learn more about you as a person. Can you take us back to your roots and share with our listeners about your upbringing, your childhood? How did your early experiences shape your journey and eventually led you to become a visionary entrepreneur and mentor?
Wow, that's a very deep question. I don't necessarily always believe into linearity of kind of career growth or life growth, and I do believe into importance of being exposed to many different
Mhm.
things. I grew up in Russia, and as far as I know from my mom, is I was interested in many different little things, and I wasn't just one thing. I wanted to play with everything. I wanted to be part of a art class. I wanted to be part of a sports team. I wanted to play guitar. I wanted to do math. So I would say it was. I wouldn't say like I was equally talented at all, but I wanted to try it all. So there was a
Yeah,
plethora of interest that I had in my background,
you're the
and
jack of
the way
all.
yeah, I wouldn't even say Jack. I would just like, oh, I did that once, like I drummed a little bit and I tried it. Okay, that's it. I'm not sure if I want to go after it anymore, but I wanted to try it
Mhm.
out.
Mhm.
I went to a technical high school, which allowed me to be exposed to things like robotics, computers, internet. This was back in the 90s, where a lot of people, especially in Russia, did not even have exposure to the internet. It was pretty much a US-based phenomenon at the moment. And
Mhm.
that like, whole experience kind of got wrapped up when I immigrated to the United States, where I went to a school which, interestingly, did not have any of those technical elements, and it allowed me to see the contrast of what I was exposed to and what was missing, and it was kind of, and I
Mhm.
started filling in that gap, was finding more experiences by either reading books, either finding resources on more robotics or more computers. Um, I happened to live in a neighborhood where a lot of people would just, once they were done with their computers, they would just put them on the sidewalk and would buy a new one. So for a young engineer like myself, picking up those computers and taking them apart and putting a new ones together was fairly pretty easy. This was
Mm.
at the times before any privacy or any other concerns were around. So people literally would put their computers out with their disks, with their personal information out there. And I erased all of it, but it was an interesting process to go through. I was part of mathematics Olympics, science Olympics, what are the physics Olympics. So I basically exposed myself to a lot of scientific and mathematical things early on. I really liked the numbers. I really liked the way to work with numbers. I wouldn't say it was the best one. I just really liked when I was approaching the problem and I was able to solve the problem. It just felt really good. So I continued doing so. That brings me to kind of college, and in college, decided that I'm super interested in finding out how the world of computers works with the world of robotics. It was always
Mhm.
fascinating to me how like line of codes could be translated into motion of a physical body. And I spent the next 4 years of being part of a robotics club at the university. It was a walk-in machine competition, and I focused on different parts of it. I also built a book exchange. It was like a SaaS, I guess you can call it SaaS, but it was basically a website with a database where students could come and exchange their books, used books, because books and textbooks are still expensive. So it
Yeah.
was one way of saving money. I did
Mhm.
not commercialize the venture because at that time it was a purely open source fanatic where I could not accept people being charged for any of the services, but it did kind of lay the foundation for my founder ambitions later in life, where I
Mhm.
understood how to build the business. I understood how to cater to the customers. I understood how to build the technology. After
Awesome.
university, and I went into financial industry because that industry was dominating in New York, where I
Mm.
landed, and I spent about 8 years in various trading platforms, developer roles, where I had insight into how markets work, how the back office all worked, how the front office worked. Then I got my MBA, and after MBA, I learned the structured way of doing entrepreneurship. So whatever I was doing before, it was basically out of my own head, out of my friends' heads, out of the textbooks or something like that. But when I did my MBA, I learned the structured entrepreneurship, like the Steve Blank phenomenon, the lean startup approach, the business canvas approach, where you can structure your vision in a way that you can actually execute. And going back to my original comment, is that you can actually know that you're making progress on your venture and what pitfalls you might be experiencing and how you can fill them in. Post MBA, I jumped into a peer-to-peer startup, which didn't take off for one reason or another. But during that time, I met somebody else who was trying to get their wealth management business going, and I joined them as a CTO. And it kind of sets me up for the other phase of my life, for a different kind of an entrepreneur journey, where now I was able to take the structured entrepreneurship that I learned during my MBA and applied to this startup. And it was actually successful. For uh, a lot of credit is given to my partners and my contribution too. We grew from about four people to about 150, eventually selling into a larger financial company. So that was a huge learning experience for myself and gave me an opportunity to take all that knowledge and leverage it and start mentoring and managing others uh, as part of the experience. Then I decided
Got it.
to focus on something which I believe that was more impactful, and I switched over to aerospace, where I helped to co-found a company that was looking at other satellites in space. We launched a couple of satellites. We wrote code for it. We took images in space. So I thought it was very exciting. And then after that, I decided to like see what other opportunities I have to make impact, and I switched into executive coaching, where I feel that if I am able to make somebody just a little bit better, or just able to help them to reach their goals faster, then I'm making a much more impactful action than if I'm doing it as an individual executive. I'm still deliberating that with myself, where the approach that's the best for like moving the industry forward. But that's my kind of approach right now.
Got it. Got it. And I happen to notice that you mentioned, and I want to jump into your how you got into the coaching and other side of it. But before we get into that, you mentioned that you were wiping off the hard drives and opening the computers when you were a child, right? Were there any key influences from your family or surroundings, like an uncle or a friend, who played a significant role in shaping your entrepreneurial spirit? The reason I'm asking is a lot of guests I get on my show who have this kind of, you know, influence in their life early in their life, right? Like a father, like a mother who runs a car wash, or an uncle who is like a builder, right? And
Yeah,
then they get these signals, and that those signals unconsciously get stored into their back of their memory, but they always want, oh, I want to become like that person, or
yeah.
you get inspiration. Well, was there somebody like that in your childhood, or?
Yeah, no, I kept thinking about my path versus other people's path, and I don't think I've had any familiar influences. My mother was an engineer, a bridge builder. Eventually, during the 90s in Russia, she switched over to more of an executive assistant role. So there was definitely not a lot of entrepreneurial thinking there. She was a single mother, so there was no approach there. And anybody who kind of like my surroundings, I didn't know anybody else who was an entrepreneur personally. Now, I also read a lot of stories about other people like owning companies or starting companies. And during the 90s, if you're probably familiar with the world history, Russia was a very, very scary and very risky place to do any business. So when you would open up a front page of a newspaper, you would always had a discussion of somebody else's murder. You know, like the VP of this company was killed, VP of this company was killed, VP of this concern was killed. So like sort of like any entrepreneurial ambitions that I had, I basically did not have any because I didn't want to end up on the sidewalk like the rest of this entrepreneurs. And I feel like with that
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
thinking, I did enter into the United States. Um, what did inspire me though, once I was in the United States, is that well, it's it's actually a pretty peaceful environment for entrepreneurs. You don't have to end up on the sidewalk shot by somebody else, and you can actually continue doing business. And
Mm,
two, how much of the actual news environment and newspaper environment and magazines and websites were celebrating entrepreneurship, where you get to do
mm,
something from nothing. Now, it's not always the case for everybody, but it just felt for me that you were building something from nothing. And
mm.
I was very curious about that because it felt magical. And when I was pursuing my activities and studies in my first startup and second startup and third startup, um, I kept thinking about that, right? So how did other people do that?
Mm,
Now, I did not have an opportunity to find a good mentor, nor I didn't have a mentor who would tell me like, hey, you need to find a mentor, or here's a person you need to talk to about mentorship. But I do appreciate the books, the authors, the websites, the courses, everything that was available. I think I took a lot of them to find out how to build startup, how to work it through, how to survive. So I'm very thankful to those resources.
got it. Got it. So it was mostly when you moved to US. That's what the surroundings and the appreciation around you was
Yes.
very influential. Got it. Got it. Great. So, being in the space where you're now coaching all these entrepreneurs, I would like to know from your experience, what are the three most critical pain points or problems or challenges with which founders come to you? For example, we have hundreds and hundreds of founders listening to our podcast. Some of them already got funded by some accelerator programs, right? Some of them are into focusing towards their A series, but mostly the questions we raise during our Q&As is, Ash, I am a SaaS founder. I am in health space. I am in DevOps space. I am in supply chain space. The challenge is to get more traction, more customer, because they're early stage, right? They're
Yeah.
early stage
Yeah.
founders. And some people are into growth hacking, some people are into inbound lead generation, some people are into outbound sales, things like that. But they're very stressed, if you know what I mean. They're very stressed. and and that stress limits their capability of thinking rationally sometimes, not all the
Yes.
time, sometimes. So I
Yeah.
would like to know from you, what are the three very high, or I would say most frequent problems the entrepreneurs come to you for solution?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you already mentioned a couple of them. Is one, how do you get traction? How do you get that growth hacking going? Another one related to stress. Well, they do come with a lot of stress, and the end it usually ends up more like time management and prioritization problem. So in a sense, how can you do all these things in the time that you're allowed? And a third one, you mentioned that some of the startups might already have funding, but it is fundraising, because a lot of people who are coming into this world, into the startup world, starting companies for the first time, they've never done fundraising. They don't even know where to start. There's a plethora of other problems, but I'd say those are probably top three.
The top three. Okay. Okay, great. So would you be able, so okay, let me reiterate through it. Traction, time management, and raising funds, right? Would you
Yes.
be able to share a success story of a few of your customer for each of these verticals?
Yeah, absolutely. Without naming names, so the first one is traction.
Hmm.
One of the issues that I noticed, and this is kind of more oriented towards engineering and more like scientific cohort of individuals, is that
Hmm.
we have to learn how to talk to people outside of our office. And this is when it comes to traction and when it comes to talking to customers. A lot of time, engineers and scientific folks, we think inside our heads, right? We think like we've learned all these materials from textbooks. We should be able to figure out what is right for the people. But the biggest answer lies not with us, it's what other people want for us to develop in order for them to pay for that value for us. And that kind of big conclusion is kind of hard to jump to that kind of conclusion for science and engineering folks. So we walk through those changes and how to practice those interviews. We do a lot of mock interviews. Where you can find those customers, right? Is it LinkedIn? Is it conferences? Is it your local meetups? Is it through your personal network? Is it somebody you can call and just give you a list of prospects and leads that you can work with? And usually that's what gets a lot of initial traction going.
Hmm.
For the stress management, time management, the question that again that comes in is like, I'm very stressed. What can I do about it? How can I manage my time better?
Hmm.
There is a concept in startups that is called urgent versus important. Urgent is
Hmm.
something that you absolutely have to do. Important, that has to be done, but it doesn't have to be now. And when you separate those, you are able to find the time and to actually prioritize the things which are more urgent for you. At the same time, again, a lot of people coming into this line of work are individual contributors in the sense that you know really well how to do the thing that they're doing. But because business comes with a lot of overhead, managing business, legal, HR, hiring, planning fundraising, it does not allow them actually all this time to accomplish all those things. And you have to
Mm,
delegate. And interestingly, a lot of people who are coming to me, they have not had a lot of experience with delegation yet. So we go through that journey of figuring out what things can be delegated, what things can be monitored, how can you train others to do the things that you're currently doing. So this way you can clean up a lot of things on your plate and you don't have to execute them yourselves, and thus creating more free time. So that's for stress, for time management, delegation, the number one thing which I work with.
mhm.
This is how we kind of get to success.
Got it. Got it. And
And,
then,
and, and mention, sorry,
sorry.
fundraising, right?
Yeah.
With fundraising, typical success stories are about how do you actually talk to VCs or individual angels or anybody who's raising money. One is you have to address the traction, right? You have to present your traction in the best way possible that you actually the market wants your product. And number two, how do you adjust your pitch to each individual VC and investor that you're talking to? Because all of them have individual theses on the market. They have individual theses on your line of business, on your technology. And how do you study about that? And how do you present that in the best way? And usually those conversations lead to more successful fundraisers and close more rounds.
Got it. Maybe I'll ask you a couple of more questions on this one. So what I've learned is when it comes to traction, the most important thing is how you communicate outside your office with your customers, where you find your customers, and how you communicate the information which they're looking for. When it comes to time management, the one thing which I picked up in our conversation is delegation. How most of the founders don't know how to delegate, plus differentiating between what is urgent and what is important. I would like to mention this thing because I was interviewing one of our other guests on the show, and he mentioned that um, what you have to do today, knowing that you will be dead by tonight, and that's what you do today. you know like, if you know that you have to feed your horse, but you know that your
Yeah.
horse could be alive tomorrow if you feed him tomorrow morning,
Yeah.
said, yes, I can feed him tomorrow because he could be alive for more 12 hours. So okay, you don't do it today, then
No,
you
it
only do.
sounds pretty extreme. I understand the analogy, I can understand the
Yeah,
notion, but if I was going to die tonight, I'd probably be doing none of the things that
none of
the
this
universe
stuff.
is
Yeah,
asking me to do.
it just yeah, how he explains. I was laughing too, but that actually kind of makes sense when you exaggerate something to a limit.
Yes.
Human brain kind of like, okay, processes it
Yeah.
properly.
Absolutely.
The same person actually asked me a question like, if you know that I give you 10 million pounds but you have cancer, will you take it? I said no, because why would I have cancer for 10 million? He said that means your life is more valuable than 10 million. I said yes. That was how he compared it. So that's what I remembered when we were talking about time
Yeah.
management. And then the third thing you mentioned about the fundraising part, which is interesting because the 10 years back we were in a market space where there was huge piles and piles of money. Every single person just put something on a PPT, goes to VCs, and they used to get the money. Then after 7 years, it comes to the point where, okay, you need to have at least an MVP or something substantial to prove, and then you get the money. Then it comes to the point where, oh no, we have funded billions to these startup. They run away from their funds, and now they burn everything, but they have no profits. So we are funding only people who already have traction or prove that
Yeah.
they can generate money. In your experience, where exactly we are in 2024 August, let's say, where,
Yeah.
where, where we are in terms of, because you must be meeting a lot of VCs, understanding their point of view. What are they looking at when they invest into startups nowadays?
I think the market is very tight.
Hmm.
I think it's very tight for pre-seed investors. I think it's very tight for Series A investors. Um, but again, I think it also depends on how well your business is positioned. I think in times like this, the business which actually has real traction and not like semi-believable traction is more likely to get the money, and none of the hope and dreams kind of traction. So the more concrete your business is, the more concrete your ideas, the more traction is, the likely you are to get money, and that's been always true. I
Mm,
think what happens when you we're going through the times of abundance is that ideas get funded, which have not been thoroughly researched because there is a huge FOMO happening with investors, and they will invest into anything. But when there
mhm,
is a crunch, only the ideas which have literal traction, which
mm,
have customers, will get you off the ground. And there are, of course, situations where somebody might be able to raise off just a PowerPoint, but I haven't heard about too many people who are able to do that unless they've been founders before and have successfully raised and built successful companies. I think
mm.
the same rules apply in most of the markets. And if you don't have traction, there's no way you can ask for money. That's in my opinion.
Mm, got it, got it. And I know that this is not your ex core expertise, but this is the last question. And I'll not bother you about the investing or gaining funding. Um, when when people reach out to these VCs, I see a lot of projects going to these VCs and asking for money. But in your opinion, do they really need to? Cannot can they not just bootstrap something, build it to the level where they
Yeah.
can generate money? I mean, take an example of MailChimp.
Yes.
Guy didn't got an investment for 10 years and he kept pitching, right? But he built the product since, from starting. And then it was in multi-million dollar ARR when somebody realized, okay, let's invest into that product, right?
Yeah.
It was a
Yeah.
bootstrap single solo. ByteDance, TikTok owner. He was, living in China, did his graduation, created multiple startups, never had any funding. He built it from scratch. Checkout.com guy from UK, he built it from scratch, and nobody was invested in because they're like, oh, who's gonna use your product, things like that, right? In your opinion, what sort of startup really need funding, or do we actually reach out to VCs for funding, or should we just keep bootstrapping it?
Hmm. I mean, it really depends on each case. For example, if you want to start your own bank, you definitely need a lot of money upfront to lend it out. And I don't think somebody who had no experience starting banks before would be able
Mm,
to go ahead to VCs. And you kind of have to bootstrap and start making those little loans that you have. But
yeah.
that's where you absolutely need VC money or PE money or like a friend with a lot of money so you can start. So there are some businesses which require a lot of upstart capital, right? All of a sudden you decide that you want to build submarines for the Navy, right? There are government contractors which do that, but there is no way you can just go ahead and start that unless you have additional backing from qualified funders.
Got it, got it.
For businesses which could be iterated on low volume and you can charge $5, $10, $100, maybe $1,000 for the product at the very beginning, you can absolutely bootstrap yourself and get to the very respectable revenues and eventually either get acquired or perhaps participate in a fundraising round yourself later on. The problem there is that how fast are you going to build them, right? So it sounds like one of your founders you mentioned has been building the business for 10 years. Now, he either got lucky or he's very smart. He was able to get really great revenues over 10 years. But
Mm,
you still have to put some food on the table, right? So you have to have another job. You have to have another source of income, unless you're endowed or you have rich relatives who are sponsoring you, which is still a form of investment. But let's say
yeah.
if you have a job and you find this extra time to build this business, what you're deciding basically between is how fast you will get to that revenue that you want. Because you can
Mm,
still have a very bootstrap business, it will just take you much, 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 much longer to reach the revenue unless you expect accept investment from the VCs. So what investment from outside does, it accelerates whatever you can do in a much longer time, in a much shorter time, and also scales it much faster by hiring other people, enable them to do the work that you are doing now, but in multiple different, let's say, countries or multiple different industries, so you can reuse your code. It still requires, though, again, going back to the traction, that you have to have your basic unit economics done, that you have at least a little bit traction, and then to show that that traction could be made much bigger before you make the pitch. So to answer your question, whether you should bootstrap or whether you should seek funding, it's really very individual decision, and it depends on the industry and the business you're in. But regardless whether you're searching for funding, you still have to have some level of traction.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so let's get back to the interview. What sort of services do you provide to your ICP? And I think the prequel question to this is, who is your ICP, to understand, and then what sort of services you provide to your ICPs. And then if it is possible, can you share a compelling case study that highlights how a company, a founder, or a business achieved the success, they achieved the KPIs and solved their key business challenges. And I love to hear about the specifics, like where they were and then where they reached, and the steps taken to implement your solution or your mentorship.
Absolutely. So a bunch of questions there. Let me unpack that a little bit. I primarily work with first-time technology founders and also with technology executives, and I help them get through the issues which you mentioned. And those could be traction, it could be fundraising, it could be time management, it could be team management, it could be hiring, it could be HR, legal, within the context of a technology company. Some of the conversations that I'm having, and you asked me for a good use case. So I was working with executive at a crypto company, and one of their issues was that they didn't have any time to address a lot of things on their plate. And what we worked on is, one is, as I mentioned before, prioritization, right? So how do you, and actually leveraging some of the techniques you mentioned, like how do you exaggerate some of the scales of different priorities, and how you can actually make an intuitive decision on what needs to go before one thing or the other. And the second one is delegation, right? You might be the smartest person to do the work in the company, but when you're doing the work, which you can hire and pay much less for, you're doing disservice to your shareholders. Hypothetically, you're not maybe making the dollars, but a founder is typically between $500 to $1,000 per hour of labor in equity equivalent. Basically means that you're making the company that much money in equity by working on that work. So if you're doing work which is worth $50 per hour, $100 per hour, you are underselling your own equity in service to the company. So by default, you are actually underutilizing that whole potential of $500 to $1,000 per hour that you can give to the company. So it is your responsibility to shareholders, to yourself, to other equity holders, to delegate. To others, they can do part of the work. So that's what conversation that I had with that individual. And even after 2-3 weeks, we're able to create, I think, 6 to 8 additional hours of work time by either trusting others and perhaps expecting a slightly lower output quality, or hiring other individuals to replace the capacity that now has to be taken care of while the founder is focusing on the more important things.
Got it. Got it. That's interesting, because I think when you have these kind of bottlenecks, it's very important to go deep, into your business or inside the bottle, and then figure out how you can, get out of it, and then potentially keep it running in the similar fashion so that you can improve, not degrade, right? Great stuff. So throughout your journey, Vladimir, you must have had some experiences that must have been valuable lessons learned. If you don't mind sharing, could you reflect on your experiences and tell us about one mistake or a setback that you encountered along the way that you now consider maybe not a regret but a lesson learned? And additionally, what advice would you give our listeners based on this experience?
Um, I'd say it's not a, well, it is a lesson learned, but I don't think I've spent enough on entrepreneurial activities when I was in university. I think
Mhm.
I was such deliver and more charitable work and giving to others without being compensated that I could have explored that concept a little bit better. So while I was going into the work life and going to my career, I could have leveraged that philosophy better. But I had to deconstruct it while I was working somewhere else to get to the opinion that I think everybody's labor should be compensated properly, and also how to create value of your own offering so you can be compensated for that.
Mhm.
Um, Also, you mentioned kind of like a big lesson, interesting lesson. Well, not a big lesson, but like an interesting lesson. What I learned is that, and even though I'm a technologist, I realized technology is actually not super important in business. Like it is important, but it is secondary to the business model. Because if the business model does not operate and your technology is sophisticated as a time machine, it's actually irrelevant because
Mhm.
then you have no business. You made something for hobby, for art, and I'm not disrespecting anybody's technological achievements, but unless you can put it to use and unless you have a user who's paying for that, who are satisfied and getting value out of things other than yourself, I mean, unless you're building it only for yourself, there's no real purpose for that technology, right? It was an exciting project, it was an exciting hobby, it's great, beautiful technology. But if there is no
Mhm.
traction with the market, if there is no user that is using it, if there is no user that is paying for it, it's not important, right? So it is your responsibility as a founder, a technology founder, not technology founder, is to find that first dollar of traction for the tech that you built. And you also don't have to build any tech whatsoever. Most of the tech,
Mhm.
you can just have presentation in Figma for the prospective users, and they're super excited and want to start using it. Build it over the weekend and give them the first version after you have users who are excited about it. So
Yeah,
this way you can prioritize and save your time for what you're building for them.
definitely. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, like back 10 years back when I was working in a tech consulting, and I was returning back from my assignment. We used to go, Monday morning flight, London Heathrow to some part of Europe, coming back on Friday, typical consultant lives. And I was sitting with my director, and we were just having this conversation about how to deal with the stakeholder, customer side stakeholder. And he mentioned something to me which I never forget. He said that even though we are tech consultants, we need to understand that technology is not business. Business is business. That actually got deep into my head, because everywhere, any company I go, even though they have like their core backbone dependent on the technology, they don't generate money, they don't deliver the value with the technology is a tool to help them create the value.
Right.
So yeah, you're spot on that technology is just the secondary part of the business is the core part of it. Great. So we are heading towards the end, Vladimir. So let's go into our lightning round. I've got 6 quick fire questions for
Wow.
you.
Okay.
Yeah. If you just can answer them as quickly as you can. You ready?
Yes.
Great. What are the 3 top things a founder needs to understand when he is running the business?
Traction. Relationships are important. What's inside your head is not necessarily what's inside other people's heads. Figure out questions, how you can get in sync, and also figuring out how to invest your time efficiently. When you're starting out as a founder, you don't have much money, but you have a lot of time. Treat your money investment as a portfolio and allocate them in time into buckets, which will yield dividends.
Got it. Got it. What book would you recommend to our audience and why?
That's a good one. Business Model Generation by which will help most of the technology founders to understand how to use business canvas model to generate their ideas and frame their ideas and progress in their ideas.
Got it. Got it. Okay. What's one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful founder?
Humility, empathy. I know you asked for one, but I feel like if you're good with humans, you're more likely to leverage their skills and your own skills to the betterment of your own company than if you're a hardcore individual contributor.
Got it. Got it. What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
Ooh, that's a good one. I try to align things which I can do in parallel while using up the least amount of time. Now, this is a little bit of a personal thing, but I couldn't figure out a time to go to the gym. But then I found out there's a gym which has a daycare as part of it attached. So now I don't just give my daughter additional entertainment, but also am able to go to the gym at the same time, and
Mhm.
that's satisfying like two birds with one stone. But I also look for other opportunities to kind of overlap this kind of energy investment and time allocation.
That is awesome business idea, to be honest. I mean, I'm totally up for it. If somebody comes to me and say, actually, let's open a gym for parents where you have these babysitters and baby playing ground, it would be perfect. We
Yeah,
don't have, I don't think so. We have it in England.
yeah.
Trust me. Good, great. What's a new or a crazy business idea you would love to pursue if you had time?
Ooh, I think founder of what's the company named? The there's a dating company out there, but I thought at some point there's a crazy idea where you have avatar dating, where somebody downloads your mind and downloads everybody else's minds, and your avatars just go out dating in the virtual world, and then they meet up the people who they actually like, and then once that processing happens, they come out and recommend it to you. It also comes out from the episode of Dark Mirror. Not Dark Mirror. Sorry. Wow, I'm messing up the names. Um, but I'll remember it later. It's a Netflix series.
Okay. It's interesting, having your avatar dating in in your place and then saving your time to do all these dating things.
Well,
Cool.
I'm yeah yeah because like I think like dating is very Black Mirror. I remember it's dark. Black Mirror is the episode. But yeah, it should save a significant amount of effort. I think same thing could be perhaps applied to sales and product offering. You can just send your
Mhm,
avatar, and you don't have to listen to all the sales pitches. The avatar does,
mhm.
and then you just come back with whatever things are useful for you.
Yeah, yeah. And last but not least, what's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
Oh, I I was manager of a tour for a national tour of a punk rock band. We went for about a 12-day tour across America, and we hit 9 cities in about 12 days. So, uh,
Am I allowed to
so
ask which one?
it's a small one. It's you know it's their name is Elysium.
Okay. Okay. Well, do you still get tickets for it?
No, they're they're not yeah.
Okay, great stuff. Well, Vladimir, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story, unpacking some last years of building this business and some of the ups and downs. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that to contact you?
Absolutely, Ash. So I would prefer that if somebody wants to reach out to me, is address me through my website, which is humaninterfaces.co. And
Hmm.
also, you can score a free session, and you just have to add podcasts at the end of it. So it's
Hmm.
humaninterfaces.co/podcast.
Got it. Got it. Awesome. Vladimir, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your inspiring journey and the impactful work you're doing. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Founders Podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Ash.
Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Founders Podcast. I hope you found our conversation with Vladimir insightful and inspiring. If you're a founder or industry expert interested in sharing your story on our podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at ash@artcircles.com. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to our podcast and make sure to reach out to Vladimir on his website. Stay updated on our future interviews with proven founders and industry experts. Stay inspired, stay motivated, and keep building.